Okay, so this is our webinar for week 2 in ADL636. So let's go ahead and get started. Our agenda for tonight is I'm going to go over just some general class things that people probably have questions about, but I'm going to go through this quickly because we did it last week, and since this is pre-recorded, you can go ahead and just pause the video and kind of read it for yourself. So I won't spend too much time on that. Then we will review the week 2 assignments, and after that, we will not be taking roll. That is from our live webinar. So this should go fairly quickly. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so these are kind of just our general class things that talk about when grades will be posted. So you can see that right here about discussion boards, a couple of hints on there. So you can just kind of pause this if you'd like to and look at that. And then it also talks about my website, which does have some tips and some samples of work and things like that. Okay, we also have our weekly meetings. We will decide, actually week 3, it used to say weeks 2 and 3, sorry about that, but week 3 may be pre-recorded. We will talk about that and see what you guys want to do and what seems best. And then week 4, we still need to determine what's going to happen on week 4, but I'll give you more details on that as we go along. And then, of course, rubrics are very important. Okay, so this week we're talking about assessment tools. So we're talking about different types of tools. Most of those tools that we're talking about are going to be found online in things like Kahoot and quizzes and things like that. So there's a few questions right here. First of all, how do you use assessment tools to evaluate student learning? You guys can go ahead and read these. I don't need to read those for you right now. So for these questions here, since we are doing a pre-recorded webinar instead of a live webinar, we can't really discuss these live, obviously. So you do have a write-up that's due with this webinar. So if you want to just put a little bit, I'm not talking about even a paragraph for each of these things because that makes kind of a long write-up, but if you want to put just a little bit of your thoughts on these questions, that would be great. So for instance, where it says, what technology tools do students use to demonstrate understanding? If you just want to give a quick list, this is what they use. You don't need to put anything more in there. So feel free to make that short and sweet, but if you could kind of just give me a little bit of discussion in your write-up on these questions, that would be fantastic. So I'll go ahead and just give a couple of thoughts, my thoughts on this. So how to use assessment tools to evaluate student learning. Well, I currently teach 6th grade math and science. I use this type of thing more for math. I do use it for science as well, but I use it more regularly for math. So I would use, for instance, Google Forms. I can, with just a little bit of time, a little bit of preparation, I can create a question or two on a math concept that we're going over, and I can ask the students that. And Google Forms does great on this and gives me some charts and graphs and tells me, which questions they didn't understand and which ones they did. It does a very good job for that. One of the things I do like about it is it is pretty easy to do. So even if I think of something on the fly, I can do that. If I'm even something that comes up with even less preparation, I'll sometimes use Google Classroom, and they have a Ask a Question feature in there. Currently it's under the Classwork tab within the Google Classroom. And that one is more of just a quick question, and then I just scan it for the right answer. Google Forms, I can actually go in there and I can put in the right answer, and Google Forms has even gotten better over the years, and now you can put in a specific answer and not have to make it multiple choice. And it will know if they've typed in the specific answer correctly, which is very nice. But in the Google Classroom, basically what I would do is just say, let's think of very simple math. What is 2 plus 2? Obviously, I'm asking more difficult questions than that. But if I put that in there, that would be posted to my Google Classroom. My students would say, 4, hopefully, and then I would just scan those answers to kind of get an idea of who's not understanding it and who is, and if we need to move on or spend a little more time on that concept. So that's sort of how I use assessment tools for formative evaluation. And then I also do use Google Forms for summative evaluation where I can make my quizzes and my tests in Google Forms. And it can be a little tricky sometimes. I'll have to use things like, screen captures and things like that to make the questions look as I want them to, but it works pretty well with a little bit of practice. And again, gives me some nice charts and graphs and tells me which questions were difficult and which questions were easy. It grades my tests and quizzes for me very quickly, so that saves me some time. So that's one of the tools I would use for assessment in my classroom regularly. I also use Edpuzzle as well, and that's for math video tutorials that I have, and I can ask questions and check for understanding with that tool as well. But that's all I'll say on that. That kind of goes along with what technology tools are used for assessment as well, since those are both technology tools. What technology tools do students use to demonstrate understanding? I've used a variety of technology tools. One of them that's, one of the basic ones would be Google Slides, because they would create a presentation. They might present it to the class, get in a cooperative group, things like that. And then lastly, trying not to spend a whole lot of time on this and let you guys kind of think about it and give me your thoughts as well. But lastly, how can rubrics be designed to effectively assess learning? One of the biggest things I would think about rubrics is making sure they are assessing what you and what the standards might think are important for those students to be able to demonstrate. So it's easy to make a rubric and say, well, if you're doing a presentation of some type, they need to have this many slides and this many sounds and this many graphics, and those are good things, and we use those even at National because they are something that needs to be assessed. But you need to be able to go a little bit deeper than that too, and figure out what do you really need these students to know, to be able to do, and figure out a way to put that into the rubric. All right, let's go ahead and continue here. So for this week, again, some important class readings, and a lot of these things do not really have points associated in the grade book, so sometimes we are tempted to skip those, but there's some very good information, again, just like week 1, and you can kind of consider that that's sort of the lecture to a certain degree in an online class like this. So don't forget about those class readings. I'm obviously not going to be checking if you've read every word of those things, but do go through there and be sure that you really absorb that material, because that's some important stuff in there. And then obviously we're not talking about infographics this week. We're talking about different things this week, obviously, like we just discussed a moment ago. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into the week 2 assignments. So your first assignment for the week is you're going to develop a plan for assessment. So you're going to be using, pretty much you can use whatever lesson you would like to use for this. You may have a lesson that you've done in your Moodle course. It mentions that within the directions, and you're more than welcome to use that. But if that doesn't work for you, you can also use any lesson that you have or any lesson that you would like to develop. There is, right here, it does say to download this template right here, and I'll show you that in a moment. Okay, so this is a screenshot of our class website, and obviously we're in assignment number 1 that we're talking about. And then right here, you're going to see this lesson plan. So if you click on that, it'll open up a Microsoft Word document. Excuse me. And this is a sample of what the document looks like. And basically what you're doing is you're just filling out this template. So don't make the mistake of just using your own lesson plan in your own format. You do have to use this format for this lesson plan. So make sure you fill out the specific areas for this lesson plan. But essentially you're just kind of filling in these areas. What standards does it meet? State and local standards, and if you're science, the new next generation science standards, things like that. What technology standards for ISTE here does it meet? Things like that. So just kind of fill that out, and just kind of fill in the blanks with your lesson plan, and that's basically that lesson. Okay. After you finish that, you're going to be developing a rubric, like we just talked about a moment ago. You're going to create your own rubric, so you want to be thinking about, what makes a good rubric. But then, if you're going to be creating the rubric, you can create your own rubric. If you're fairly good at Microsoft Word or your favorite word processing tool, you can probably design your own rubric. But there are some really good online tools out there, and that's where I talked about Rubistar here, which is a great one. That can create your rubric for you and make it look very professional, very nice. So unless you're kind of a pro at your word processing software, I would probably go ahead and just use one of the online tools that we talk about on our class website. So basically what you're going to be doing is creating a rubric for this lesson plan that you just created. That's basically about it for that one. So just make sure that you think about those things that you want to include within that rubric. What do you want the students to be able to do as you grade their assignment? Okay, so after this webinar is done for week 2, there is a reflection. There are points in the grade book, so you'll have to go ahead and submit that excuse me, in the class website. Remember, it's not really a formal paper. It's just a reflection. It's only meant to be about 3 or 4 paragraphs. It may be a tiny bit longer, but not much, really. We could probably stick to the 3 or 4 paragraphs. In the class website, there is a section that explains, what your rubric should look like, what it should contain. There's a Word document there that kind of gives you some ideas of how it should look and what should be in it. And then you'll go ahead and post that to the appropriate Dropbox or whatever you want to call it, where you submit your assignment in our class. So I just brought up here the document that shows, a little bit of information about how to write up a reflection. This would be more of an asynchronous discussion in this case, but basically you can spend the good portion of your time, since we're not meeting live here, you can spend a good portion of your time talking about these questions here that we talked about. I'll go bring those up again. So spending your time thinking of, responding to these questions there. And like it says in the other slide, 3 or 4 paragraphs is more than enough. So you don't need to reference things or have that type of thing involved as well. It's just a reflection. You want to make sure it doesn't have typos and things like that on it, but it's kind of just a quick reflection on what we're talking about here. And this would be a good place to start if you can maybe attend to at least a couple of those questions. All right, and that is about it. Don't forget about, for week 3, you're going to need to be interviewing someone. So you might want to be thinking about that still, because you don't want that to come up too quickly on you. Right here is actually for week 3, and it talks about you're going to be locating an educational subject matter expert in the field of institutional data evaluation or assessment. Good place to look is at your district office, or if you have someone else in mind, you can obviously do that. But you're going to be interviewing that person, and these are some possible questions. Actually, you're going to want to be asking these questions and at least 2 questions that aren't listed here. So you'll want to make sure you attend to these questions and 2 other questions. So it looks like about 10 questions altogether. You can have more if you'd like to, but just make sure you get answered these questions right here. So this is where you'll find information on that assignment that I keep referring to within the first couple of weeks, because you want to make sure probably want to have that person lined up before week 3, just so you're not rushing to finish everything, just in case they can't meet during week 3. You want to make sure you can meet with them. So you might want to start to contact that person as soon as possible. All right, thank you very much, and don't forget to submit your write-up to the appropriate Dropbox. Have a great day.